Hello, and thank you for listening. I'm gonna skip the intro this time because I feel like it. Chapter 4. The hulking Cryptea returned to the salute and broke their line, turning to face each other. Zack keyed into Resolute's closed comms and spoke into the team's helmets. Suggestions? Hector responded first.
If this artifact is so important, we won't be the last ones here for it.
Zack nodded agreement. Lewis spoke next. Local transports have probably been destroyed. Covenant transports may be unavailable. Our Pelican may be the only extraction option. That was true, too, and inconvenient. Ethan, usually overly vocal, remained silent. Zack didn't like it. 3? He asked pointedly. You're not gonna like it. Too late for that, Zack thought. Shoot. Ethan's Mark V helmet tilted towards the officers behind Zack. I get a weird feeling from the new Siggy. That made 3. The briefing hadn't explained Banks's decision to bring a new factor into the mission, which seemed especially risky when Forerunner tech was at stake. Zack knew better than to ask. If Banks had been willing to explain himself, he would have done so up front. Resolute was just going to have to live with it. Don't tell me I'm just going to have to live with it, said Ethan, intuiting Zack's thoughts. Something's off. Zack agreed, but he wasn't about to feed his team's doubts by showing it. Ethan was clearly wound up already, though, and that wouldn't help on the mission. Better to let him blow off some now and deploy closer to his normal self. Banks has a plan. You have 30 seconds. A green confirmation signal blinked on in Zack's visor under Ethan's RSLT-3 tag. Zack stepped aside as a relatively lightly armored Spartan moved past to approach Lieutenant Sulikov. Ethan was naturally suspicious, even for an Oni agent. In fact, being an Oni agent only made it worse. From the age of 5, his entire world had been made up of spies and plotters. Watching them patch together a contrived papier-mâché reality for humanity had permanently undone his faith in anything that wasn't his team. It also taught him that there were no random events in the universe, and certainly not on a Forerunner recovery op run by Emmanuel Banks. The commander had handled Resolute on more than a dozen missions at this point, but there was no camaraderie between them. Banks always made it clear that he was Oni's tool, and Resolute was his. Now, for some reason, he had another. Ethan knew he couldn't remove the unwelcome factor, but he could add his own to counter it. Andre watched the Cryptea strategize privately, desperately curious to hear what they were saying. If he only had his equipment with him, he could rip the audio from their comlink and find out. One of the Cryptoi broke from the pack. Resolute 3, recognizable by the lightened armor of his Mjolnir suit, strode swiftly toward Commander Banks. Except that wasn't where he was going. After the first few thudding steps, Andre came to the unpleasant realization that the Spartan was approaching him. The 7-foot-tall, half-ton walking weapon stopped a foot in front of the very regular-sized lieutenant. For a few seconds, the Spartan stared straight ahead, easily looking over the top of Andre's slightly over-regulation length haircut. Then he slowly turned his helmet down, the gradual pivot emphasizing their different statures. Lieutenant Sulikov, what have you heard about Spartans? His voice was surprisingly human, slightly high-pitched and with a hint of an accent evolved from Earth's Midwest. But it was also steel-hard and utterly serious. What? The Titan stood as if frozen. Andre saw his own distorted face sliding across its silver visor and looked away, towards Banks. The commander shrugged slightly. Spartans never die? A heavy hand patted Andre's shoulder in the way an elephant might pat a field mouse. I've heard that, too. Kind of like a fuel cell calling an engine immortal, you know what I mean? A series of negative responses appeared and died on the tip of Andre's tongue. Resolute 3 seemed to get the message and continued. It's a war machine, Siggy. Lots of moving parts, but at the end of the day, it needs its engine to get where it's going. And every engine is going to use up plenty of fuel. The Cryptoid's first 2 fingers pressed into Andre's nameplate, gradually increasing their pressure until the frogs on the back dug into Andre's skin. He fought the pain and stared defiantly up at the blank faceplate until the sheer strength of the black hand forced him to take a step backward for balance. Defiance leapt up inside him. One is nothing without the other. Andre cringed internally at the weak response, but stood firmly by it. That's true, the Cryptoid mused. One is the irreplaceable result of humanity's cumulative knowledge, and the other is a crude mass harvest. But even one faulty fuel cell can delay the machine. He pinched Andre's nose between his thumb and crooked forefinger. Luckily, there will always be 100 more to replace it. He wiggled Andre's nose before releasing it and striding back to the rest of Resolute. Andre stared at their armored backs. Heat rose in his face. The Cryptea didn't seem like simple weapons anymore, and he didn't feel at all in command of them. In fact, most of what he felt as he stared at Resolute was a bubbling schoolboy's distaste. Most of it. Come on, son. Commander Banks' hand grasped Andre's shoulder and he jumped. Ahem. Yes, sir, he grunted, overcompensating for his initial response. Resolve grew as he walked behind Banks and the Marines back to the elevator. He didn't know what the commander had in mind for him, but if it gave him an edge over the Cryptea, he was all in.